Today on the show, I'm talking with Dr. John Rindy, Assistant Vice President for the Center for Career and Academic Progress at Slippery Rock University. We discuss how to help all students succeed with increasing student need and shrinking resources, how to use data analytics to tailor student success programs and initiatives to create capacity for proactive support and improve student outcomes, and how to build coalition and facilitate change management between faculty and student success support staff to ensure that institutions are delivering the most effective student success initiatives and strategies possible. Oh, one more question. Would you prefer me to call you John or Dr. Rindy?
John.
John.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Different folks have different opinions on that. Okay, well, let's get started. Welcome to the Next Practices podcast, John. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your experience and wisdom with our audience.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So I'd like to start just so our audience can get to know you a little better. If you'll take a minute to tell us about who you are and what role you play in helping students succeed during their college experience.
Sure, I'm a corporate transplant. I started my career in the corporate world and spent about 20 years there in project management and in C-level management, and then made a transition to higher education about 18 years ago. I've served as Dean of Educational Outreach. I was Director for Career Education and Development here at Slippery Rock University, where I now work for about 9 years, and then for the last 3 years, I have served as Assistant Vice President for the Center for Career and Academic Progress. And, we're working on student persistence through relationships, goal setting, values, bias to act, and obviously growth mindset.
Great. And that's a fantastic segue into and my first question I'd like to talk through is at Slippery Rock University, I know that there's strategic priorities that universities are shooting for. And then there's also obstacles and challenges that we're trying to overcome. At Slippery Rock University, what are the most pressing or top priorities when it comes to strategic priorities and also challenges and obstacles that may be standing in the way of student success at your institution?
Well, like a lot of folks who are going to be listening to the podcast, enrollment's always a big issue. We are a state institution, a regional comprehensive state institution, part of a 14 campus state system here in Pennsylvania, 10 university, 14 campus state system. And so enrollment's always going to be a big thing. We know that in the Northeast and the Midwest, particularly through about 2032, 2033, we're going to see a sharp decline in college age students. And so how do we make an identity based program mix that attracts students, but then moreover, how can we make sure more of them are moving on a continuum to progress to degree, and how is that population changing? And we know that our demographic has changed quite a bit to a demographic that is not as strong at reflection and self exploration, and with social media, self-awareness and things like simply self-regulation. So we have to address all of these things as that demographic, as this generation is changing. So, and obviously our priorities are centered around our performance indicators to our state system, but also in keeping the promises we make to students. We always say that an admission letter from Slippery Rock University means that we have looked very hard at your background and we think you can be successful here. And we want to keep that true as we move forward into this rapidly declining demographic.
Yeah, I peeked in at your strategic plan and noticed that a real central piece of it is having the capacity, creating the capacity to help all students succeed. That promise that admission to the institution is a promise that you'll be successful, and that knowing that there are practices to support students overall, but that it's also important to understand specific populations and cohorts as well to make sure that you can deliver the right support that each student needs. Um, and so I did see that priority emerge to the surface in your strategic work, to make sure that you deliver on that promise. With that in mind, it is an important goal, but I know that it is not without its challenges. And I'm curious, let's talk through what are the combination of approaches, strategies, initiatives that you're finding are making a real difference for your students and helping you deliver on that promise.
Well, we're fortunate enough. And by the way, I'm one of two co-chairs for university strategic planning, so I'm on that. I'm on that every day on behalf of the president and the cabinet. So working on those strategic priorities is something that I do regularly with my co-chair, who happens to be a faculty member in our College of Education. But to more specifically answer your question, we're very fortunate in the Center for Career and Academic Progress. We just refer to it as CCAP. So when I say CCAP, everybody knows what I'm talking about, that we're actually part of the enrollment management team. During most of my career at Slippery Rock, I've reported to our chief enrollment management officer, who's fantastic, and she's nationally known. She teaches strategic enrollment management at a national level. And our thoughts are, if it moves, we measure it, but we also then use the measurements in our daily decisions. We have a very strong office of institutional research and an office of decision support within that office. So that's been a big thing, that partnership. But moreover, I would say risk taking and design thinking attitudes have been huge here. Our leadership from the cabinet on down, and certainly in CCAP here with my leadership, is on design thinking. It's on experimentation. It's on taking risks, and if something doesn't work out, it's like, go back and try it again. But what are you going to change about it? It's not coming down on people because this uh, niche group retention went down by a percentage for the semester or something like that. I think using the array of tools like the Civitas suite, CRM, the predictive analytics has been great. We're really getting into some of the more study tools. I know the system that allows us to look at what kind of impact we're having on some of the populations that we're working with. We're using Cognos, and then we're even using other instruments like the Lassie. We're administering the Learning and Study Strategies Inventory, and we're finding out some remarkable things about our students. I've just finished a Zoom with a group of education professors where I talked about how this year with our incoming students, we identified about 5 of those scales in Lassie that seem to be very linear in terms of ending semester GPA. So we're going to start administering more Lassies to try to identify which students are likely to have those low GPAs as they finish up. It's something I hope that we can do institutional wide across all 5 colleges. And then last but not least, and I alluded to this a bit, that's an experimental attitude. Um, you know, when we have to measure what we're doing, but then we have to be willing to change, and we have to have enough willing partners across campus to invoke that change. And I think we've started to build that. And I have actually, in watching some of your podcasts, I've connected with some of the folks to see how they're building the spoke and hub and spoke models to affect change across their campuses. We're about 600 acres, and so that can get difficult since it's hard communicating across the campus and
And
constituents.
Yeah, sure. And for those of you listening who might be curious about the podcast that John's referring to, it's I'm not sure the episode number right off the top of my head, but it's the one with Dr. Tammy Wyatt from the University of Texas at San Antonio. It's a great episode where she talks through how they've really built a very collaborative, unified strategic approach that's multifaceted to solving some of the most wicked student success problems and have seen a lot of success. So if you have not had a chance to listen, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, we've made some radical changes too, even to our orientation program, which is kind of sacred on a lot of campuses, and they've not changed much on a lot of campuses. We took a 90-minute session of that now, where starting last year, we had students writing letters to themselves about why am I in college? What do I want my first semester to look like? And then how? What resources am I going to take advantage of to make sure that my semester turns out that way? I always say, if you come to Slippery Rock and don't use those resources, it's like paying your money at window one and then driving off without your food because you paid for those services. And it's an irresponsible decision, frankly. And then what we did was we had students self-address those letters, and they got them back about 2.5 weeks before midterms. And so we're actually ready to measure the impact of that once we hit 15th day census. But Yeah, we're excited to look at how that campaign worked with our first year students.
That's amazing. It's really interesting. When I was in when I was in student services, we would often say, and we were really cognizant that there's like the hope of the semester, the hope of September, and then there is the reality of November, and that sometimes the students persistence prediction and also their own motivation fluctuates over the course of the semester, and they can hit bumps in the roads and obstacles that derail them, lose motivation, get not perform as well as they thought they were going to. There's so many factors that can impact a student's ability to be successful over the course of the semester. And so I'm so interested, once you do your analysis, to learn the impact of that, because I think to help remind students of the hope of September later in the semester is pretty remarkable. I know we've talked about how your team keeps a very close eye through the Civitas Learning Platform on students' persistence predictions and other factors, powerful predictors, and other analytics insights that help you to kind of keep a close eye on how students are performing over the course of the semester. Can you talk a little bit about how that's helped you be proactive in your support, deliver more tailored services to your students?
Yeah, absolutely. I just in the Zoom call I just finished before this with the education faculty, they were asking about the predictive analytics, and I was actually going through the powerful predictors of their college, and then we actually went through their individual majors. Several of them were chairpersons, and then when you can kind of drill down and look at that curve to see, okay, at what point does midterm grades actually start to really impact your attrition? To know that is great. Although I think you have to look at a lot of standard data as well. So for example, we were doing outreach calls to students with low midterm scores. If you had two or more low midterm scores defined as C or lower, you would get a call from your department secretary. We actually abandoned that because we noted that students GPAs from midterm to final grade did not change. It was not affected by those outreach calls. And so I'm not going to ask secretaries to continue to do things that are not having measurable impact on students. So we took a different approach this time. We looked at what were the most powerful predictors 2 or 3 weeks before midterms among certain populations that we wanted to improve our retention. And then we started nudging them to attend certain programs like our Don't Crumble at Midterms program with our success coaching team. And the measurement was, did they register? Did they show up? And then obviously we measure their learning during those programs as well. So we were able to be a little more proactive there rather than reactive to low midterm scores when we saw that that outreach was really not having a lot of impact. And plus our clerical staff, they're already busy, and to ask them to do additional things when they're already doing this pretty much out of the goodness of their heart to help us out, um, we were able to clean that up a little bit and not have them do outreaches that weren't really having measurable impact.
It's really amazing to be able to influence the student's ability to succeed rather than react and help them dig out of a hole that may already be dug. Do you know? I know it's maybe early to know, but do you know the impact of that intervention?
Yes, we had very strong participation in those programs. In fact, our success coaching semesterly report just came out, and I'm going to be able to look at those numbers here shortly. But I know that we are pleased with the numbers of students that chose to attend. We have to look more closely at the best ways to communicate with those students. We were told by Civitas that we are one of the top users of the text function in the country among Civitas users, and so I think maybe in that particular outreach we didn't use the text angle. We used more of the faculty nudging them and some email nudging, and sometimes students who are maybe struggling a little bit are less apt to look at their emails, as we've seen. So. But certainly I think we had around 30 different designed nudges during the fall, many of which will be repeated during the spring. I think the best result to report is that while we hit an all-time semester persistence rate, a low one during COVID, we have been since we've added the Civitas tools, particularly, we have been building that back up to where we expect. So, whereas we were around maybe 90.5 first year, first semester student persistence 2 years ago, which is an all time low for us. When I say all time in recent measured history of 15 years or so, right now, we're sitting at around 92.6% first semester, first year student retention. And, when you have limited resources like a regional comprehensive, it's much better to know that I'm focusing those resources on students who really need us and who could really benefit from those resources. I think that's been the biggest thing. We have a fairly small staff. We have a large we've added peer career educators and peer academic coaches along with our success coaching team to try to handle this increasing volume from us, making them more exposed to campus. But it's still limited resources. And, the Civitas suite has been able to help us really focus down on where we're going to have the most impact in those students that we're trying to really help attain that dream of a college degree who otherwise might not have.
With that in mind, I'd be curious, and I think this is always a question I think people are wondering about is how are you structured your proactive support services? So I know that you have success coaches who do a lot of programming and outreach and engagement with students to provide that proactive just in time support to make sure students have the tools they need to succeed. I know at many institutions that falls on academic advisors. Do you mind walking through that relationship, that handshake, how advising is structured, if you can speak to it, and how that works together with your program and the work that y'all are doing to help support students?
Sure. Under the Pennsylvania state system, the faculty collective bargaining agreement places academic advising purely in the hands of faculty. Now, within the Center for Career and Academic Progress, I actually have a handful of faculty members, and they mostly advise our exploratory students, but they have other roles. So, for example, they design each year our first year seminar series, and they hire the faculty from across campus in the different departments to teach those first seminars. They design learning community clusters, and they handle almost all freshman scheduling. We don't let students schedule. We actually place them in a schedule, and we put them in the learning communities, which has been highly impactful in achieving the great annual retention rates we're having. However, all advisement is handled by faculty. What we saw in our success coaching program used to be housed in student affairs, particularly in our office of inclusive excellence, but they were not in the classroom, and they didn't have a lot of exposure to faculty. In fact, there was some bits of contention of faculty accusing them of doing, advisement and things like that. When we moved them over to enrollment management and to our subdivision, which is highly engaged with the provost and the deans and the chairs and the faculty, now they're in the classroom. They're speaking in first seminar. They're a major part of orientation. They have their own table at all the admissions events. They're on panels during admissions events. So students are getting this huge exposure, and as I always tell the success coaches when they're speaking in a classroom, you have two audiences. You've got the students, and you're trying to affect an action there. It's not conveying information. You're wasting time if you're trying to convey information to students because that's all they hear. You want to invoke some sort of action, but you're also doing that with the faculty member standing in the back of the class. I want them to ultimately go back to their department meeting and say, "Wow, I heard Emily McLean from Success Coaching speak, and you need to have these people in your classroom." And that's something over the last couple of years since Success Coaching has been in part of CCAP that we're really seeing to start to roll, building this trust between faculty and Success Coaching, and also using some of the Civitas products to be able to do those referrals. Now, right now, we have about a quarter of faculty with accounts in the CRM. Product, and one of the goals is to get us to up to about half of faculty using that within the next year or so. And but what faculty says, not another system, but when they can start to see the value through their colleagues' own words, that's and we can actually provide data to them showing the difference that it makes. That's when you really get a lot of people enrolling in those sort of things. I don't use the word buy-in because that means I've got to sell it to you, and nobody likes to be
Mhm.
sold to. I always say enrollment. People will voluntarily come and say, "I want to be part of that," and we've had a lot of success doing that in CCAP with faculty.
I love that. I love that shift, that turn of phrase, and that we're wanting people to see the benefit so that they raise their hand and want to join that. This is not something that we talked about or prep to talk about, but I think you've mentioned it a few times, and I think it's a challenge that I hear often from our customers and others in higher ed is change management and getting that enrollment and building coalition and um, getting folks to make that handshake and to share the responsibility that all folks on the institution have to help students succeed can be challenging because folks are siloed and folks are territorial and their communication may be difficult. Having a shared knowledge can be difficult. How are y'all approaching that really sticky problem of change management and building coalition across your institution?
Well, I have a lot of GAs and graduate interns and that we mentor here and that I've mentored over the years. And I teach them a lot of things, a lot of my catchphrases I use, but really almost anybody who has been mentored in this center has heard my catchphrase. I've been in higher ed a long time. I don't know a single person who is truly successful and got that way by sitting on their rear end in their office. You cannot sit back and wait for students to come to you. In my vision, the success coaches need to be out on the campus. Our career coaches need to be out on the campus. If we want faculty to refer in, and let's face it, on most college campuses, when teacher says it's important, then it's important. So if your career office, if your exploratory office, if your tutoring office, your writing center, your math assistant center, your success coaches don't have those relationships, they're not generally going to be at the level of importance they need to be. So those partnerships are big. The next thing I always say is, and how we built those, and really what we discovered in terms of success in building those connections, is that we colleges say retention, 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 retention. Retention is everybody's job. That is a cop out. That is a cop out because what I have found is I've gone through our 500 faculty and our, I forget the count of our staff and administration. I found that people are interested in retention, but they truly don't understand what their actual job is in retention. They think they know, but most don't really know what it is. So it's so important to start to share data in a positive and energetic way in key venues. So I speak to the council of trustees, I speak to cabinet, I speak to almost every college, deans, all faculty meeting. I get invited in there, and again, I'm going in there to change minds and change hearts and get people to take certain actions, not just to give them information. But what I found is, and even working with our secretaries across campus, they get left out of data. They don't know what our enrollment is. They don't know what our retention is. Now they do because they meet with me. All of our academic departments meet with me and my success coaches twice every semester, and I give them our persistence rates, our predictions, as well as our current enrollment for next fall, how we're doing for the next spring. Uh, those are data I have access to. Why wouldn't I let campus know about that, especially since there's so much panic about the shrinking demographic? Several of our schools in the PASHE system have merged. They don't want to be part of a merger. Then I need to inform them, A, what is the status? Anytime you want to know, you can find it out from me. I am your advocate there. B, what kind of action can you take now that will actually make a difference and keep us what we are? One of the strongest two institutions in enrollment, in persistence, and employment rates among our state system partners. How can we do that? Everybody has a part, but I need to teach you what that part is because I'm looking at these data all day. I can't do that sitting in my office, and I never have. And neither has any of the people in CCAP.
Yeah, it's getting out there and building coalition, having communication, sharing information, making meaning of that information, having conversations. And I think one thing in our previous conversations that really struck me as a important part of coalition building is allowing folks to have transparency and visibility into how the work you're doing is making a big difference. And so that they can be like, oh, interesting. How do I get a little bit of that?
That's right. Quick feedback. It's just like when we were in school. We always got so mad when faculty took 2, 3 weeks to get us a paper back. So for example, when our secretaries, we're going to meet with them on Monday, they're going to do the 15th day census outreach. So students who are being reported as not showing up for class, we want to know, are they on our rolls or not? Because obviously that impacts retention as well. We need to know if they're in class, and we need to get them off the rolls and get them into our e-withdrawal process. When we have that meeting next Monday and they're all on there and we record it for those who can't come, they're going to get all of the data on enrollment and persistence. And then they're going to get results from their last outreach, which was, hey, continuous registration just ended. Why aren't you registered? And that's another outreach we do. Now, that's nudges through text, that's nudges through emails, but it's calls from their department secretary whom they know. And as we can see, it's really impacting our persistence rate. It's really on the up. And we already have very strong persistence. I mean, we have about a 78% admissions rate here, but we perform in terms of annual retention like schools that probably admit in the 50 to 70% range. And it's because we do things very much on purpose and deliberate. And when we put in some of these other tools, like our Cognos system, like our Civitas systems, it's only helping accelerate that, as long as it's in good hands and it's in hands of people who are actually using it in collaborative ways.
In addition to improvements in persistence and retention that you're seeing, what other differences are you seeing? I know oftentimes, we were saying retention, persistence, graduation rates are the really big um, outcomes that folks are looking to move, and clearly you're doing good work there. But I know that there's a lot of other challenges in the day-to-day work and collaboration and making progress towards your goal. Since taking this data informed approach and implementing technologies to help you do the work, what differences are you seeing?
Well, one of the things we've been studying here for the last couple of years is, does dose make the difference? And the toxicologists out there remember that from Paracelsus, a quote. But I'm talking about, does, for example, success coaching dose make a difference? If you come back for two visits with a success coach versus three versus four, is there a difference? And the answer is unequivocally yes. We've seen that. We've seen that across all populations because we're measuring it, we're looking at it. I have a partner in decision support, Dr. McCarthy, who I meet with twice a month. And we just spend an hour and a half looking at data and asking, what about this population? What about that population? So looking at that dose. Another thing we've really been looking at closely is, we're mostly a majority school. We're mostly Caucasian here. We have a fairly small percentage of historically underrepresented students. However, we want to continue to work on closing that persistence gap as well as that graduation gap that exists. And we've been really successful in the last 2 years at increasing semester to semester persistence, particularly among our African American and our Hispanic students. And overall URM has really closed. And one thing that we've discovered through data, through some focus groups we've done, and this is kind of profound, and I would have never guessed it, that advocacy it advocacy amplifies identity. What I mean by that is, if you look like me, I may be more apt to come and visit you. But if I know that you're an advocate of me, and that's overt across campus, I'm going to come and use your services a lot more. And advocacy can actually serve in a campus like us, which is mostly Caucasian. Advocacy can actually serve as a surrogate to identity. So I have offices where I don't have any minority students, or I'm sorry, minority employees. And yet the percentage of students who visit them in terms of URM are way above our average URM population. So students are using them. Why? Because they are well-known advocates for underrepresented students across our campus. Well-known. They're on the President's Commission for Race and Equity. They're visible. They're doing things physically across campus that makes our underrepresented students say, they're okay, I'm going to go and use that service. So it turns out that it's not just identity, that you happen to look like me. It's identity plus advocacy, or advocacy alone and overt advocacy that attracts students to come in. And then we can also, we're also constantly looking at measurements. We're constantly doing focus groups and looking at campus climate surveys to see other things that we might be able to do, particularly on the academic side of the house, which is what we pretty much work with to help more of those students persist to a degree, dream of a college degree.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's interesting to be able to look and see those impacts as they're in progress, and then to be iterative and to make adjustments, and that really makes a big difference. Instead of having to wait until you see what happened, you can see what's happening and adjust along the way.
Oh, you said iterative. That is, you are so right. Because when you get, and I'm probably speaking to a good number of schools that have hit this kind of this high level of maybe annual persistence, and we're probably around 83%, which is really good for a regional comprehensive school, right? I think national average is 73, 74%. How do you move the needle at that point? I mean, if you're hovering around 70%, there are some big things you could do. Add first seminar, add learning community clusters, add living clusters. And there are other big things you could do to really move that needle. But once you hit where we are as an institution, it's experiments, helping save two students here, helping save students there, and doing it using data and thought and creativity and action and just repeated experimentation and not getting frustrated because really you get two measurements a year. How is persistence after fall? How is persistence after spring? That gets very frustrating for folks who work in student persistence, but because it takes a long time to see the impact of some of the larger projects we're doing. But don't get frustrated, everybody. It is incremental. If you feel like everything just is so incremental, it is. It's this baffling business that we're in trying to help students achieve that dream, and it'll work. We just got to combine data, discussions, and relationships to do that.
I love that, data, discussions, and relationships. Well, we've covered a lot of ground. I want to give space to allow you to speak to anything that we missed that we really should have covered in this conversation that you want to share with our audience.
Well, probably something that I mentioned at the very beginning is the five pillars that we have discovered here statistically seem to help promote student persistence to degree. But you need to really integrate that before students get here because all the things you tried to do in the first 2, 3, 4 weeks when a new student comes in the door, it becomes white noise because of the pressure to be socialized in a new environment and to try to go to these classes where suddenly maybe nobody's demanding that I show up there. And those pillars are that we really focus on all the way from admitted students day on is goals, short-term goals. I want to use my success coaches. I want to do better on the next exam. Long-term goals. I'd like to work for Apple or Google or whatever. Relationships, short-term relationships. I better get to know my academic advisor. I better get to know my success coach, my career coach. Long-term relationships. I better know a recruiter at Google or Apple or PNC Bank. So goals, relationships, values. This is a big one. And I think a lot of persistence professionals overlook the importance of values. Everybody has a value set, but this young generation right now is not particularly reflective. So when you talk about values, I found they don't necessarily know what you're talking about. And pardon me for being hastily general because there are students who do. But you know, is it my faith and then myself so I can take care of others and then others like my family and then learning? And where does video games fall in there? We have to have some self-regulation. And students have to learn very early that they're in a place now where they have to develop that self-regulation. And if education and learning are not among the top 3 or 4 values in your life during this investment you're making of 4 years and the cost involved, you're not going to be likely to be one of the people walking across that stage. I read names at commencement. I'm one of the name readers, and handing me that card. And so we have to impart that advice on students very early. So goals, relationships, value. Next, bias to act on those values. You know what your values are. You've inventoried your values, hopefully. We use life design here. And so there's a big exploration of values among students who come in for a life design exercise. But now do you have a bias to act when somebody says on Sunday night, there's a party, come to the party, you have an exam. Are you going to act on that value? You said that learning and education, not the degree, learning and education is in your top 5. And last but not least, the work of Dr. Carol Dweck and her great book, Mindset. And I think this harkens to what you were saying about the decisions students make and it gets to be midterms and everything swirling around you. But through it all, did you have a growth mindset? Or did you have a fixed mindset? I'm not a math person. Scientifically, that's never been proven that you're not a math person. That's a fixed mindset, and that's going to get you nowhere. So first, we have to teach students to recognize when they're slipping into a fixed mindset to see if they err on the side of fixed mindset. And we have to work on that through giving them examples of growth mindset. So high engagement before students ever arrive so that they can be successful when they first hit the ground. But then once they're here, continuing to use the great tools that we have available to us in terms of predictive analytics and making sure that our faculty and staff across campus know that these analytics are available and request them from us so that they can actually act on them in their own paradigm.
Yeah, that's so important to help empower students. When I back in a long time ago when I was an academic advisor, I would often talk to students about there is a disconnect between your goals and your actions and making that connection, helping them to see that, helping be there to help guide and provide the support, and then also help them with all the external pressures and obstacles and hidden curriculum that they may not be aware of, is so important. And helping students succeed is a really big part of enrollment. It's a really big part of this of making sure we deliver on the promise to students, but making sure that our institutions are sustainable.
That is the goal, to keep us all going so that we can continue to have make those dreams come true. I did a labor market analysis the other day using one of our labor market tools on, what is the relative abundance of jobs for high school graduates with 0 to 1 years experience compared to bachelor's degree with 0 to 1. Then I looked at that same comparison for jobs 7 to 8 years experience. So while there are more high school diploma jobs, to about 2 million to about 1.6 million posted in the United States in the last 365 days, when you get to 7 to 8 years experience, there are still 1 million jobs in the last year that were posted seeking a bachelor's degree and 7 to 8 years experience, but there were only about 90,000 seeking a high school diploma and 7 to 8 years experience. So people who dance around the issue of whether a college degree is worth it or not, I always tell students, you're not going to spend $1 million to come here, but let me show you the difference in salary you're going to make 70 years out on the median if you do get your degree completed. And so, I mean, we're fighting battles on all sides in higher education. We're only going to win them with data and information, and then and helping the students who choose to come here and to our institutions make really good decisions from day one. That's the day they're touring your campus, the day they come to those admitted students days, the day they come to orientation. And certainly if you have a first seminar or some type of grand meeting where you're calling them all together, sending them off in the right way, helping the community assistants, the residents assistants in their residence halls, constantly beating the drum of goals, relationships, values, bias to act, and mindset. We've got to keep working on these students over and over again, especially since there's so many distractions with FOMO and social media and all the other things they get involved in, which are important for wellness, but sometimes they overdo it a bit.
Yeah, how do we how everything in moderation, right?
Yes, yes.
Well, Don, thank you so much for coming on Next Practices. This has been a really great conversation. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Katie. I enjoyed it.